Hi, everybody. This is Megan Kirby. I am the Dissemination and Implementation Specialist for Language Dynamics Group. And today we have the pleasure of welcoming one of the co-creators of Story Champs and a friend of mine as well, Dr. Trina Spencer. And she's going to take us through how to teach vocabulary using Story Champs. And so without further ado, we've got a lot to cover. Take it away.
All right, great. Well, it's super exciting to do this. I know Megan's been trying to get me to do a webinar for a while, but I was kind of out of the country and doing lots of other kinds of travels and trying to reduce my demands. So we had to postpone a little bit, but here we are. We're going to talk about vocabulary. I love vocabulary, AKA sparkle words, right? I don't have a good sense of how many people are on this call who are like beginners or people who are more veterans. I mean, I recognize some of the names. So there's some people who have been using Story Champs for some time. So I definitely acknowledge that. And I want to say that because you guys are out there using it, maybe not every day, but more than me, probably, I would love to get your ideas and like the way you're extending Story Champs to teach vocabulary. Towards the end, I should be able to leave some time for you guys to share your ideas and things for other people. Okay, so I do have a lot of content. I'm going to go through it kind of quickly. If you are new to Story Champs, I really encourage you to do some of the other recorded webinars and, join the Facebook PLC to try to get some, input from others who are more experienced and, watch videos and things like that. Okay. Also, I love it when people email me in my emails. I have two emails that are relevant here, trinaspencer@usf.edu and at trina.spencer@languagedynamicsgroup.com. And I am an associate professor at University of South Florida, and I mostly do research and develop stuff related to Story Champs and assessments. Okay, so why do we need Story Champs? Let's just start right there. For those of us who are new to it, the reading crisis is quite real. And there are way too many students failing to read on grade level. And this is a phenomenon that we experience here in the US, but it's also something that even on other fairly developed countries are experiencing as well. So across the globe, my experience is that children are not reading on grade level, and across the globe that the problems are not necessarily, or they're not largely or primarily a decoding problem, yet that's where our efforts have been in schools. The efforts to enhance decoding instruction has barely moved the needle. It's one of the evidences we have that it's not just decoding problems, even though we know that schools haven't really taught decoding efficiently or well over the last couple decades. Nonetheless, the instruction for comprehension related skills and repertoires is almost non-existent in schools. So what we do find is that a simplistic way of saying this is that educators are solving the wrong problem because they don't have the right tools. And that's where Story Champs and our cubed and our assessment tools come in, is really designed to be the right tools to help educators solve the right problem. Okay, so this is a graphic that's actually published in a new article. If you haven't checked it out, it's an open access article in the Reading Teacher called Classroom-Based Oral Storytelling Benefits Reading, Writing, and Social Skills, something like that. Anyway, you guys should check it out, especially if you have a teacher friend or you are a teacher and you want to know how to integrate oral storytelling in the classroom. That's a brand new article that just came out maybe, I don't know, a month or two ago. Anyway, so this graphic, I like using this graphic because it emphasizes the importance of listening and speaking for the development of reading and writing. And it also shows that all of these things, listening, speaking, reading, and writing, are all language. Okay. And this is the reason why, some of the linguists and really well-known researchers in these areas say every teacher is a language teacher. Unfortunately, teachers do not get instruction in language. And, even myself, I had to learn what like a subordinate clause was, what's a relative pronoun. I had, like these are things I didn't even know, yet, I had a PhD. Right? You have to learn these things and somebody has to teach you about language. And so what happens as a result of not knowing enough about language, we're not teaching it very well in school. And so this idea that listening and speaking is a foundation is kind of like a just simple message that I have been consistently talking about. And when people hear it, they're like, oh yeah, of course that makes sense. But across the globe, we're still teaching reading and writing almost exclusively through reading and writing mechanisms. And we have kind of ignored this foundation. But like if you're building a house, you don't build the house on a rocky foundation or one that doesn't exist. And listening and speaking are the foundations for reading and writing. And if we go through those foundations first, and make sure that we have a firm and steady foundation, we're going to be able to teach reading and writing much more efficiently. Notice also that I have a kind of like some arrows there. These 4 skills are actually reciprocal in nature, because when you work on listening, you're also working on things that are related to reading, and speaking and writing, that's the expressive versus receptive side. And then listening and speaking are reciprocal, and reading and writing are reciprocal. And so when you work on something that might be common in all 4 of those specific repertoires, you actually improve all 4 of those repertoires. So that means we can be very efficient if we recognize the language constellations at the center of all 4 of these skills. Okay, so academic language is my favorite topic, and I'm so immersed in it. As a matter of fact, today I was cleaning data from my academic language database that has 9,000 rows, 9,000 language samples for academic language, and I have 27 more rows to clean, but my eyes are bleeding from this task. So academic language up to here. Anyway, this is one of my favorite quotes. Academic language is the pivotal skill repertoire for closing the achievement gap, and attention to it is nearly absent in primary grades, right? We know that this is that pivotal skill that's relevant to listening, speaking, reading, and writing, yet nobody knows how to teach it, and we do not have the right tools. At least without Story Champs, we don't have the right tools. Okay, so academic language can be defined as the language used in school to help students acquire and use knowledge, and it is oral and written. All right, so it involves things like vocabulary, complex syntax, narrative informational discourse, so like the patterns in these discourse levels, and then inferencing. And if you want a whole course on academic language, the Northern Speech Services, I did a CEU course for them. If you are SLPs, you can get CEU credits, ASHA CEU credits with them. And I get really good feedback on the course, but it's it's all intense on academic language. Might be a good resource. So let's talk about vocabulary though, because that's really the topic of tonight. And oftentimes when we say academic language, people immediately go to vocabulary. Well, it's a whole lot more than vocabulary, but it is a critical element of it. Let's see, last night in my class, we were talking about the fact that most of the research that we have on improving vocabulary shows that it doesn't actually transfer to reading comprehension improvements unless it's also integrated with the other types of other dimensions of academic language. So if you work on vocabulary in isolation, you're not really going to improve or move the needle on reading comprehension or writing. You have to then pair it with syntax, complex syntax and grammar, informational narrative discourse, and inferencing to actually have that transfer effect. Make sure you remember that. It's about this integration of these dimensions of academic language. All right, but let's talk about vocabulary because that's what tonight's webinar is about. So they're kind of a conceptual framework. I'm sure many of you know this, a tiered model of vocabulary. There are basic words, things like warm, dog, tired, run, look, right? These are words that appear in normal, day-to-day conversation. They're high frequency words and they rarely require instruction. Okay, but then in terms of academic, these are more academic words. These would be tier 2 words, high utility words like contradict, variety, surface, These appear across contexts and domains, but they're low frequency in conversation. In the Story Champs program, we call these sparkle words. Okay, and then there are tier 3 words, which are low frequency generally, like just we don't hear them very often or read them very often. They're limited to specific topics and domains, like disciplines, right? Sciencey words. And then they're best when a specific need arises. And in the Story Champs program, we call these new terms. And it's funny, I used to have examples there, but things like photosynthesis, citizen, government, or canals, or those are kind of words that are domain specific that would be considered tier 3 and new terms in the Story Champs program. One of the things I want to point out is when we're working with children that have language difficulties, or just typically developing children who are struggling with comprehension, we probably need to be more intentional about polysemous words, right? I just love saying the word, but they're words that have multiple meanings. And they also may have different parts of speech. Well, the English language has a ton of polysemous words. Look at this really common word, ground. It actually has 32 different meanings for one word spelled the same, Ground, 32. And I'm just giving you some examples. Firm or dry land, as a noun, as an adjective, it's situated on or at the surface of the earth. It's on, the ground. And then you could ground something, you lay or set it down, or to put out of action or make unable to participate, like as in grounding an airplane, right? So that's an example of a polysemous word. And there are many sources for you to even Google some lists of fine polysemous words that are likely prevalent in the academic material or the curriculum that your kids are exposed to, so that you could work on those words. All right. But anyway, I digress. But morphemes is another dimension and aspect of vocabulary that we might not think about, right? There's inflectional morphology, which is just, adding your grammatical components like a plural s, an ing, ed, est, things like that. But it's the derivational morphology that we really need to work on quite explicitly when we're talking about vocabulary, because a prefix or a suffix added to a root word, it actually creates a new word from the original form. So here's an example. The word port, which means to carry. Look at all of the different words that we can make out of that root word by adding or subtracting affixes, right? So this is the kind of thing that if we teach this one word, we might be able to get these other things. And if we teach the morphology in the words, the patterns in the words, we might be able to get more. So I'm just trying to bring your attention to how powerful word learning is and how complex it actually is for our kiddos. Okay, so now let's talk about Story Champs. What is it? Well, it's a multi-tiered academic language curriculum. Doesn't just teach vocabulary, but vocabulary is one of the integrated dimensions of academic language that's in the program. It is designed for children who are in preschool to 3rd grade, and of course beyond, because older students who have language within that instructional range of pre-K to 3rd grade would be very appropriate. You just might have to accommodate or make adjustments with the story themes, because they're really designed for young kids. And then of course, Story Champs can be delivered by paraprofessionals, teachers, literacy specialists, SLPs, parents, anybody, right? It's easy to use. It's designed to be used by a versatile group. And that's kind of like our intent always, is to make it simple enough for anybody to use. Okay, I also want to point out that Story Champs has a lot of great research. We have an infographic on the Language Dynamics Group website. And one of the things I wanted to point out is that, because I'm talking about vocabulary, at the bottom in the left is kind of all the outcome measures of research in the research studies. And if you look at the darker and longer the line is, the larger the effect size is. So when you look at taught vocabulary and inferential vocabulary, which if we have time, I'm going to show you the actual results of some of those studies, our effect sizes are very large, right, in story champs. The cool thing is the vocabulary instruction is embedded in all the other things. So it's not like it's a drill. It's not like pulling it out of something meaningful context. It's all done together in a very integrated way. This also, I wanted to point out that there is a recent meta-analysis on interventions designed to improve narrative language, and story champs is these ones that I'm showing you at the bottom, all of which have larger effects, observed outcomes, right? Those are the things at the bottom. That dotted line is kind of like the average effect, and all the story champ studies are on the right side showing that we have larger effects. And if you notice, this is about all of them. We're like at least a third, maybe a little bit more than that, of all the narrative intervention studies. And these are just the ones that were published at the time that they did this review. Okay, so why isn't there more attention to vocabulary instruction in schools? First, I want to say there probably is more attention to vocabulary than there is the other dimensions of academic language, but still there's not a lot of great attention in school about vocabulary instruction. So I would say that some of my answers are that it's separated from this other kind of higher order language. There's a lot of like teach this word explicitly and in isolation kind of a thing. And then dictionary definitions and sentence writing might be kind of like the go-to strategies for things. And also productive vocabulary instruction is actually hard to do. There are also like few really good resources. A lot of times that when we're teaching vocabulary, teachers just don't know what else to do other than this word means this, and let's practice the definitions. And so those are some of our barriers, I think, in schools. And of course, I'm speaking to probably a mixed audience. Maybe we have teachers, maybe we have SLPs, maybe we have reading specialists. It really doesn't matter. My point here is that we need better tools. We need to do a better job. And maybe you do a good job, but not everybody has the tools and resources. So here's what we know from research in terms of like what vocabulary instruction should look like. And the reason why I'm telling you this now, that when I show you what happens in story champs, you already have kind of like, here's what the research literature tells us we're supposed to be using, and you'll see how that is integrated into the story champs program. So we need to have systematic, focused vocabulary instruction. Of course, there's going to be some words that we have to teach explicitly and systematically. We need to make sure that there is repeated exposures to practice the new vocabulary words that we're teaching, and sufficient opportunities to use in a variety of contexts. So we can't just teach us a word and then this is the only story or the only context in which that word ever occurs. And then we need strategies to help students become independent vocabulary learners. We got to figure out a way to teach kids to be good, strong vocabulary or word learners, because the kids who need vocabulary instruction are already maybe many words behind, and they're not going to be able to catch up through just explicit, systematic, focused instruction. They're going to need strategies to be able to get word meanings through context and through reading and listening and those kinds of things. So those are kind of like our 4 major points that we need to keep in mind from the literature on vocabulary instruction. Okay, so story champs. Some key features of story champs are engaging visual materials, explicit teaching procedures, and carefully structured stories. Those are kind of the hallmark. I'm showing you some photos here. If you don't know, I recently returned from South Africa, where I was a Fulbrighter for several months, 7 months to be exact. And I worked with some schools there, and you see them, they are using story champs. And I love these kids. I love these pictures. So it kind of warms my heart to be able to show people the kind of cool stuff that's happening in other countries around story champs. All right, my the other on the right side of this slide is really the recipe for stories. And the reason why I'm showing these kiddos is because when I was a Fulbrighter, I had to like work with the locals to identify stories that would be child relevant, language relevant, and culturally relevant, right? Because they are critical elements of story champs, which is the reason why our stories are written for personal themes or child relevant themes, so that kids can go, oh yeah, that's like me, or that happened to me once, right? We have that intentional. There's a couple reasons. The one reason that we want these child relevant themes is so that they can relate to the story and learn the hard parts, the parts that they don't know, like the vocabulary word. If they understand the context and have experienced that, but the word is different, it's easier to learn the word. But if you're trying to teach a word or two words in a context that's unfamiliar, then they're learning the context too. They're learning background knowledge too, right? And then the other reason is so that it can transfer to their own personal stories, because what kids do in a story champ session is just the beginning. It's just a little bit of acquisition. What they do outside of the session should be 80% of their practice with the storytelling and the words, and that's generalization. And when they do that, when they continue to practice the telling stories and using the vocabulary words outside of that story champ session, that's how they're gonna, that's one of the reasons why story champs work so much, is the way we teach it, is it so that it's immediately useful. And then the kids keep practicing on their own. So you as an SLP or a teacher only does 20% of the work, and the kids do it on their own, because the stories that we've given them already relate to their lives. So we've given them the sentence structures and the vocabulary to talk about things they care about. And actually, when I just was in South Africa in September and October, and I did a focus group there with a number of people, speech language pathologists, teachers, and parents of children with disabilities in South Africa. And we were looking at the story champ stories for cultural relevance. And they gave me some of the coolest things, like, all these moms in these images are skinny, but the moms in Africa have large breasts. Right. And I was like, actually, I know I made that observation, but I didn't connect it to the illustrations. And then other things they would say is the brightness of the clothing, right? Even in these photos, the children are wearing nice clothes, but these are old clothes, probably been passed on to other kids in that school for years and years. They're dingier in color. They're more subdued in color than some of the illustrations. And so things like that were so culturally, I wouldn't have picked up on them. We need to explore those things in these other contexts. All right, so these are the materials, just a snapshot of it. We have illustrations, icons, games, lots of materials on the flash drive. And the storybook. So the carefully structured stories, that's where I'm going to go into next. And I'm going to show you where some of the vocabulary words are kind of like tucked in. This is a level A classic story. It's one of our simplest, it is our simplest story. And notice there are vocabulary targets, but they're not in the story. They're only if you want to add them, or if you want to work on them separately, then you can do some, manipulation of the story. But otherwise, they're not there. And this particular story level, it was not designed to work on vocabulary. This is also a level A, but this story was designed to work on vocabulary because it's a blitz story. The blitz stories are, all the blitz stories have embedded vocabulary targets in them. And this one actually has 4 words with only 2 that have contextual support. And that's an important distinction. The black bold are the primary targets of that particular lesson, and they have clues embedded in them. They're in the italics. So gulped is the word, and then quickly, and then ate it fast. Those were the clues. And then delectable is the target word, and the clue is yummy. Now the words disappointed and ruined could also be, a target, but they would have to be explicitly taught because the definitions or the clues are not illuminated in the context. Okay, so this is another blitz story, but it's a level B. And the only difference in the level B stories is that there's more story grammar elements. a few more words, and longer, right? So as you go up from A to J, the stories get longer, more complex in terms of discourse. And then again, the black bold words are the primary targets, and they have the italicized words are the clues. Now, when we hit level C, no longer are the vocabulary words the primary targets. Here, we're working on causal connections. Now, keep in mind, the vocabulary words are still in this story: disappointed, ruined, gulp, thrilled, and delicious. But because the purpose of the story is not to teach those words using those clues, the black bold words, which is because and so that, those are the primary targets, causal connections. And then the same kind of thing with the temporal connections. But keep in mind, all of the stories from level B, blitz stories from level A to J, all have embedded vocabulary words. They're just, each level is designed to teach a different primary target. Okay, so this one would be modifiers and causal and temporal connections. But again, the bold gray words are in there because kids need to have additional practice with words, and you can be practicing them and teaching them whichever level of story you choose. This is a level J. And notice the story grammar elements across the bottom, that's what increased, and the length. Okay, and then the illustrations in the Story Champs program, the Blitz stories have 8 panels. The classic stories have 5 panels. And if you're doing a Blitz story level A through I, you would only use panels 1, 2, 3, 7, and 8. But if you're using a level J story, you would need all 8. And that's because it has a double episode. There's probably another webinar talking about how you would teach those specific things. And so I'm not going to go into them much today, but that's the level B, where you would use 1, 2, 3, 7, and 8. All right, let me just check the chat and see if is there anything in here?
Nope, you're good. Keep going.
Yeah, okay. Let me know if I need to address something, okay?
I absolutely will. Keep going.
All right, good. Okay, so let me just say, I kind of walked through, let's see, visual material and carefully constructed stories. And so now I'm going to be transitioning into the explicit teaching procedures. But one of the challenges for new users is where to start, because Story Champs has so much flexibility and so much capacity. It's a little bit like, it's a little overwhelming. And so one of the things that I've done to help you get started in terms of lesson planning is create these quick start guides. So it's in the box. It's a hard copy, and I'm sure Megan or others have a PDF. If you need that, just email somebody and request it. But these quick start guides, one of the things that that it's designed to do is help you identify the correct lesson plans to get started, and then give you a suggested sequence across the bottom, these at the bottom. But what I want to point out is that each one of those grades has a section on vocabulary. Okay, so let's say you work with just preschoolers, then I would go to the preschool quick start guide, and you want to work on vocabulary. Then it's telling you the academic standards on the left, they're in orange. These are just sample learning standards. Understand increasingly precise vocabulary, understand adverbs, whatever. And then what lesson plans. And in fact, vocabulary is only taught through add-on lessons, which I'm going to explain that in a few minutes. But there's master lesson plans and then add-on. And vocabulary can literally be added on to whatever lesson you want, because all the stories can have some vocabulary instruction embedded in it. And then you can also differentiate that too. So like the whole group, let's say you're doing a small group and you've got 3 kids, but only one of them is ready to work on vocabulary. That's okay. You just embed it for that child. It'll still work. Anyway, so you got some instruction here on vocabulary. The guidance section is kind of like, if you ask Trina for advice, that's what it would be. It's just kind of like my clinical experience about how to use these and what you should be expecting from kids at each of those grade levels. So here's the master lesson plan. It is on your flash drive. I can't tell you how many times people get their box and they say, great, I'm overwhelmed. How do I do this? And I said, have you checked the master lesson plans on your flash drive? And they go, oh, no. I was like, well, that's where it is. And the reason why it's on your flash drive is because there are 65 different lesson plans and every user is going to use just maybe a handful of them, not all 65. So we don't pass that cost along to the user, because you can just print out the 2 or 3 lesson plans that you're going to be using. Anyway, in the lesson plans, these are the instructional design elements that are embedded in them. And, that's really my job, to create those lesson plans in a way that it aligns with instructional design and the science of learning and behavior. So all of the teaching procedures are based on the effective teaching literature and principles of effective instruction. One that's very, very important is multiple exemplar training. And let's see, I don't have an example of that, but what that means is that you should not be using the same story in consecutive lessons, because the stories have patterns and you want to teach patterns, not memorization of a particular story. And you learn the pattern through multiple exemplars of that pattern. And so that's why there's multiple stories. Okay, and then we use active responding games to keep children active. We use peer tutoring. My master's thesis was on the social benefits of class-wide peer tutoring. So we use a class-wide peer tutoring strategy in there. And of course, we have this story chimps, like this fun, like team theme that's kind of based on my my findings from my master's research. Specific prompt fading procedures so that we can transfer stimulus controls, what that's called, even though you don't need to know that. So we can build from like prompted and kind of like scaffolded work to independence. It's very intentional in there. We have specific types of corrections outlined. And then of course, so that we have explicit, flexible, and individualized targets are built into the teaching procedures. So there are the way the lesson plans are organized is by how large the group is, that you're going to work with, either large group, small group, one-on-one, and then there's these add-on lessons that kind of go in where you need them to be. And the reason for that is, from an instructional design perspective, you deliver to a large group and you get a large group engaged with you differently than you do a small group. And then you do that differently than you do an individual. So that's how the lesson plans are organized. Okay. So I also always encourage people to read the manual. I worked hard to make it not difficult to read. It's got tons of graphics. I did not do the graphics. That's Olivia. She handles the graphics, but I wanted it to be user friendly. So it's also on the flash drive, not in a printed manual to save costs. So I absolutely recommend you reading that. And then this is in the manual, but I want to make sure you understand that when you're using it, trying to figure out what lesson and story and level and all those things, there's kind of like some steps you have to go through. The first one is you need to select a lesson and a story. So you identify whether you're going to do large, small, or individual, and those are color-coded purple, yellow, and green. All right, and then you need to identify the targets that you're going to be working on, and you have to use assessment data. And of course, the cubed or the narrative language measures listening or NLM reading would be the most appropriate to help you identify whether you're going to do basic story structure, enhanced plus, or advanced. I don't have time to go into all of those levels, but I think it's in another webinar somewhere. You also need to choose, or you get to choose, your genre and task targets. Like, are you going to be doing retail or personal and fictional generation? Is it going to be story, or is it going to be informational? Is it going to be oral? Is it going to be writing? All of those are options, and you have to make the decision as the user. All right. And then you can add on linguistic targets, which are causal connections, temporal connections, and modifiers. And then there are 4 types of vocabulary words that you can choose from. Classic, explicit. I don't generally recommend that, but they're there if you need the simple stories. And then those are the ones that you can manipulate the stories with those words. And then the blitz explicit words were the gray bold words, and then blitz contextual were the black bold words. And then new terms are the star with the plus in the informational set of icons. All right, and then Third piece, you have to choose then your master lesson plan and or your add-on based on those targets. And there are 57 master lesson plans and 8 add-on lessons. That's when you get your lesson plan. And also at the top of the lesson plans, it'll tell you what stories that you need to use and then what levels are appropriate. And then there are 24 stories with 10 levels of sophistication. So there's a lot of options. And if you're going to read any part of the manual, this is the part you should read because it's the how to get to the part that you need. And it's kind of like the blessing and the curse of Story Champs is it's highly flexible, right? But it also makes it a little bit tricky to use because you've got to figure out what your learners need in order to be effective with them. Oh, I gotta go faster. So these are some master lesson plans. I'm hoping that most of you are familiar with it. So we're going to talk about vocabulary here. So there are 4 add-on lesson plans that are appropriate for vocabulary. And these are just some lesson plans that you could use them with. And I kind of use them as demonstration. They're kind of like the go-to ones. So that's what I'm going to be working on. And then if you're doing informational lessons, the vocabulary piece is down here, information, sparkle, and connection words. Okay, so let's say, oh, I mentioned this before. This is some instructional things at the top, which add-on lessons might be appropriate for this particular lesson plan. So 58 is classic vocabulary words, which is those ones that you'd have to put in because they're not already there. And again, not my necessarily recommended. But even so, if you were using an add-on lesson plan, sorry, let me back up. Step number 2. So if you notice, step number 1 is the same on both lessons. Step number 2 on the add-on lesson is the part that you want to stick in right here. So basically between step 1 and 2, you've got to do this. This story could be more interesting if we use some unusual words. When we replace common simple words with more sophisticated ones, fun words, we add sparkle to the story. Let me show you. And then you go through these steps right there. And then once you've done these steps, you actually just finish the steps. This is part of the add-on lesson. Just finish the steps of the master lesson plan, but encourage the use of the sparkle words. At the end of the sentence, have children define the words and use the words in a sentence, and then repeat it as often as you can because you need more exposures. And then of course, optional would be a word journal. This is a word journal right here. These are also on your flash drive with your printables. And these, obviously are for kids who can transcribe, that have those abilities. Certainly older kids can write various syntactical and grammatical forms of the words. So like, keep in mind that this might be a good place to work on derivational or inflectional morphology of that vocabulary word. You also want to encourage students to think about the shades of meaning or multiple words that mean something similar and why you would choose the word gallop versus run, something like that. And then also encourage students to think about and write novel sentences in which the word is used in different contexts. So we want to encourage the use of the words outside of that story that they learned it in Story Champs. Okay. And then of course, all of these things build meta-linguistics, which is, I forgot to mention in that list of 4 principles or the way we're supposed to teach vocabulary. It's really about building meta-linguistic knowledge about words. So if somebody has a knowledge that they don't know the meaning of a word, they can detect that they don't understand it. And then they might have a strategy to figure out the meaning of the word, which is what we want to do in Story Champs, is bring attention to it. But sometimes kids recognize that they don't know the word, but they've never been trained to stop and go, wait, I don't know that word. Anyway, so we want to build meta-linguistics. So here's another example. This Blitz one, no, it's the same idea. It goes the sparkle word, the sparkle instruction can go right there, and then it continues. What I was looking for is, I already talked about this. This is one I want to talk about. Okay, so add-on lesson plan 60 is my favorite, and that's because it's targeting the black bold vocabulary words in the Blitz stories, and it's teaching children to use the clues in the story to figure out the meaning of the word. So this tells us, Blitz, level A or level B, which master lesson plans you can add this to, and then the word journal that could be helpful. So this clue finding step is my favorite, right? In this story, the story has a couple of big words in it that you might not understand. I don't know what just happened. Anyway, let's see if we can figure out what the word means, right? So one of the things you want to do is you want to have the students repeat the word and then have them listen for clues. And then if they don't have the ability to figure out the meaning of the word using the clues, then the teacher or the interventionist would go through a talk aloud procedure where they just kind of talk through, oh, that might be the clue right there, right? Oh, cluttered, it kind of sounds like her room is messy. Yeah, it says right here her room is messy. I wonder if cluttered means messy. So you just kind of like model that talking about it. And then once you come to some conclusion, it's like, yeah, I think cluttered means messy. Everybody say that with me. Cluttered means messy. Great. What does cluttered mean? Messy. So then you're getting them to say the word, say the definition, and then you can repeat that step with each of the sparkle words. And then, of course, the master lesson plan say finish the steps of the the add-on lesson plan says finish the steps of the master lesson plan, but make sure that you're having kids use the word when there's an opportunity for it, define it, and then at the end they can use the words in sentences. So they're getting more practice. So these are the clues right here, that very hot, messy, and melted. Those are the clues. Okay, Spot the Sparkle is another add-on lesson plan or add-on lesson that I would really encourage you to use. Again, on your flash drive is a ton of Spot the Sparkle posters. So all of the words that are in the Blitz stories are in a poster that looks like this. There's a lot of words. So there's 8 words in every story. 8 times 24 is basically how many posters you have. And notice the purple word, the large one, is the word that's in the story. But on the right, there's a word cloud of synonyms. And some should be easier and some should be harder. The idea here is that we're introducing those gradations or the subtle differences between words, and so that we can have a conversation. And then we're also kind of semantically learning a cluster of words that have the same meaning or similar meaning. And that's actually a better, easier way. You can learn multiple words that way rather than just one of that meaning with that definition. There's cluttered. I wanted to go back. How you play Spot the Sparkle goes like this. Immediately following your lesson in which that sparkle word was used in the Blitz story, you display the poster. So they're on their flash drive. You can print them out, laminate them, whatever you want to do. Not everybody wants to use them and not everybody can use them, which is another reason why they're on the flash drive. But if I was a classroom teacher or a SLP who was using Story Champs consistently, I would absolutely be printing those out and laminating them and making them available. But anyway, you do the discussion of the word, the synonyms, give some kids some kind of oral practice with it. And then you can play Spot the Sparkle for a week or for a month, whatever. At some sort of interval, the students are then challenged to spot the sparkle words, right? So any of those words, either, the target word or the synonym, if the word is used by the child, heard by the child, read by the child, they can put a tally mark or write their name in the white space. And then you can, identify some goals or some sort of reward for reaching a goal, either with a class or with your caseload or however you want to do it. And my guess is that we've got some creative people on this webinar today who've been using the Spot the Sparkle posters in some awesome way. Okay, so we also can do the same kind of vocabulary in information lessons. Now, keep in mind, in information lessons, you need to use the grade level curriculum and choose words out of there. And that's pretty important because we're wanting to supplement and enhance, reteach, or pre-teach what they should be accessing in school. We don't want to do something separate, because if we're talking about, let's say, SLP's caseload, kids with DLD, they need extra support to be able to access the curriculum, not different support. They just need additional. And so we want to use the passages, the kinds of things that are already in their curriculum for science and social studies, for example. Anyway, so those are just examples. In these words, the words flora and fauna are domain specific words, habitat as well, but the words thrive and, let's see, adapt are the words that I chose for tier 2 for the Sparkle. Okay, so here's a couple guidelines. It's not so much that you have to teach story grammar first, but you have to make sure that you've got good story grammar. It's really hard to be teaching vocabulary and language complexity if kids don't have a basic story patterns, right? But that doesn't take long, couple sessions and you're good to go. But you want to layer on these other things like complex language and vocabulary when they can tell a basic story. All right. And then definitely be focusing and keeping in mind that you're teaching a meta-linguistic skill that's kind of like, language and cognition about language. And so one of the ways to do that is build in these repetitions and reviews of the Sparkle words. They're already in the levels, but you want to be careful not to go from level to level in the same story in consecutive session. Rather, it's best to use cycles so that they hear those same words again in like 2 or 3 weeks, right? Then they are getting extra exposures to them. It's probably best to only work on 2 or 4 target words at a time. That's one of the reasons why we've got just a couple that have the contextual support and then some that are just in there as explicit, like you would have to explicitly teach them so that they're getting exposure to words, but they're not being overloaded. And then certainly use the Spot the Sparkle or the word journals. I didn't really talk about that, but I did talk about that. It's on the flash drive under printables as extension activities to enhance that word consciousness. And then of course, I like to any of the words that you've already taught through like retelling and using the Story Champs stories, you can make a list of those words for them to be able to like choose 3 of these words and write a story, right? And generate their own story, maybe with the story starter cards or a personal story, somehow getting them to use the new words in other contexts. And then, of course, nonfiction books for the new terms. If you're aligning it in terms of theme and content, those words are likely to show up like habitats, right? And flora and fauna could be showing up in those things. So the way you would teach it in the lessons, and of course the lesson plans are kind of already helping you do that. When a child does not use a Sparkle word, when the opportunity arises, you want them to prompt to use it, as long as that's the target for that particular learner. So you ask him or her to tell the part again, but using the story, using the Sparkle word, great, but use the Sparkle word if they're amenable to that, right? Otherwise, you just give them the word and model the sentence. You can also, like, let's say they do a sentence without using the Sparkle word, but it might not be appropriate for you to prompt that particular child to do that. Then you might just say, yeah, remember our Sparkle word for messy was unkempt. Remember, it means messy. It's the same thing, unkempt, right? And now at that point, you could have the child repeat the word or repeat the whole sentence. And I would encourage you to do that, but it kind of depends on whether or not the child can tolerate the prompting, or if you're just should be celebrating that they said the sentence. Anyway, so you really want to end that correction procedure with the child using the word to the extent possible. And then of course, generalization is important. Once the children have learned what the idea of a Sparkle is, the concept can be reinforced in pretty much all academic and social activities. Teacher read alouds. Oh, that sounds like a sparkle word. I wonder if there's some clues around it. So those procedures from the add-on lessons can be integrated into other activities. So they could do sustained silent reading and then have a word journal where they identify 3 new words, 3 sparkle words. Just because we're increasing word consciousness, it can be then integrated into all of these other activities. Writing, of course, is a great way to do that depending on how old the children are. And then I would always try to practice using clues to figure out the meanings or the shades of meanings. These are really important inferencing skills needed for high stakes tests, like your state tests and things. And then one of the things that I like to ask is well, how do you know that's what it means? Or what clues? Because when you do that, when you ask how you know, or what clue are you using, it increases their consciousness that they are using those clues and that that's what they should be doing. I also want to give you some kind of extension resources. This is one of my favorites. I use it all the time. Coreknowledge.org. There are lots and lots of free materials, free activities, but notice that even their vocabulary chart is broken down into tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and then they even have these multiple meanings and they provide definitions. What's so great about core knowledge is they're also grade level. So the words that kids are supposed to know in first grade, they're going to be in their materials. And so I refer to them a lot when I'm working on vocabulary or really anything, especially domain specific or informational text. And then it's also a place where we go to get ideas for the words that we integrate into story champs. Let's see, due to time, I think I'm going to skip the stuff on goals, because I want to show some of the data and then give some people some time to offer some examples of how they're integrating or generalizing that. So here's what I want to tell you. So there's a study that Megan and I did. Academic language intervention improves vocabulary and narrative skills. But the reason why I want to show you is the vocabulary data, right? My friend Kay is going to recognize these 3 little youngsters. Aren't they so cute? My daughter is the one in pigtails on the right, and she is now 13, and she is not that cute, and she stinks. Okay, so what happened is we did the story champs, that lesson 60, where we integrated the clue finding procedure, and we had explicit words that we were teaching. And what you're seeing here is kids who did not, the control kids are kids who did not get that intervention. And the treatment kids are the kids on the right, and each child has their own graph, and it was a 12-week intervention. So every week they got exposed to 4 new words, and they had multiple lessons with those clue finding and then some extensions. So Monday and Wednesday were the clue finding lessons, Tuesday and Thursday were extension kind of activities. And so they learned those 4 words. And what you see here are pre-taught, the pre-test before the words were taught, and then the post-test, open triangles are pre-test before the words are taught. Closed triangles are post-test after the words were taught. And then the closed circle is a retention probe. So at the end of the 12 weeks, we assessed again whether or not they retained the definitions of those words. So this is telling us that the Story Champs intervention, remember it was Master Lesson Plan 26 plus add-on lesson 60. That was the combo here that we used, that we are able to learn and the kids were able to retain the words that we explicitly taught, which was awesome. This was these are great outcomes. And of course, these are not kids' real names, their identities, and I have permission to share these ones. Okay, these are retention probes. So this is just looking at those things a different way, but it's the groups. So at the top, you see the group that got the treatment. Pre-test probes were low, post-test probes are high. There was some forgetting of the words, but not tons. And then at the bottom, these are the control kids. All of them look the same, right? Without instruction, there was no improvement. Okay, now the reason I'm showing you this one, this is pre-post data. Retelling for the treatment group improved a ton. You see the gray is pre-test and post-test is black. Look at that, that's weird. But anyway, and so we would expect that for retelling, of course, because that was part of the lessons. But on the right-hand side is the one that I really want you to see, is that we tested vocabulary words pre and post that 12-week phase, but we did not teach those vocabulary words. They were untaught words that had clues embedded in the stories. So these data are showing us that the group that received the Story Champs intervention, remember the add-on lesson, number 60 with that clue finding, it actually improved these kids' ability to define a word using context, right? So they didn't know the vocabulary words, they didn't know what they meant, but they were able to figure it out after just listening to the story one time. To me, this is a huge, huge and important outcome because we need to be able to teach strategies that are going to help kids be effective word learners. Remember, that was number 4 on that list from the research literature. So Story Champs does those things. We have explicit systematic instruction. I can't remember what the 2 middle ones were. Repeated practice of the words, and then practice in different contexts. And then the 4th one was basically raising meta-linguistics and the ability, increasing strategies to figure out the meaning of words on their own. So that's what these data show. Okay, I am ready. Let's see. I don't know. I would really like to hear from some of our veteran users of their creative ways that they've been using Sparkle words and or things that they're doing that seem to be working really well around vocabulary. So are they able to talk, Megan?
Yeah, they're coming
Okay,
in.
good.
I have, let's see, someone's typing. But for everybody else, if you don't have any stories, just make sure you go into the chat because that's where your links are for the attendance form so that you don't email me later. And to sign up for our mailing list because there's a special coming out soon. But besides them, I mean, let's see.
Yeah, I'm also happy to entertain some questions.
Yeah.
But I know, like, let's see, Abby, the Sparkle Fairy. And by the way, if you're not a member of the Story Champs PLC, do join the Facebook group. You know, it's a pretty mild group, you know, but that's where Abby posted a really adorable picture of her in her Halloween costume, which she was the Sparkle Word Fairy.
I will throw that in the group as well.
Yeah. It was pretty awesome. I know I've had a lot of fun hearing from teachers who have like a sparkle board instead of like a word wall. They'll have like a sparkle wall or sparkle board. I just think those are like, you know, anything to engage kids to become better word learners is a great plan.
I have had it, I don't think anybody is in here, but I have had some folks merge or integrate this with math, so in graphing. And so the tally marks, and that's a kindergarten core. I mean, it's in our state standards, and tallying and then graphing those in bar graphs. So what they had done, I believe it was an SLP, had pushed in, and so was working with the kindergarten teacher then to turn those tallies into graphs and work Story Champs into math to find more time for Story Champs, which was awesome.
That's cool.
So
that's really cool. Oh, Kate, what are you talking about a morph house? Can you unmute yourself and tell us what you mean by a morph house? No? What do you think a morph house is?
Maybe it's the house with morphemes. I don't know. Oh, Kate, hold on. Let me see. Okay, hold on. Let me see if I can unmute you. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's in the thing because even Abby, you know, like,
I don't
Well, that's
think
so cute. She will knight papers with sparkle words. I will also
nice.
give out sparkle gel pens that we use to circle dull words. Oh, I like that. Dull words, right? You circle them with the sparkle gels when they're editing. I like that a lot. That makes the editing process probably more fun if they can use cool sparkle gel pens.
So Deborah asked if and how others are using story champs in self-contained students in middle and high school. We get this question a lot. And so especially with, I mean, it's great for the vocabulary, but I think most of the time we're focused on the lessons for narrative structure at that point, because if you don't have it by then, that's our critical time. Feel free to anybody in the audience to jump in. I know this has come up also in the Story Champs PLC, right? Where it is focused heavily on trying to teach like personal story telling.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, like, do a couple retells, use if there are story champ stories that are like content appropriate, you know, you've got to choose wisely there, and then just use a couple of them and try to get them into generating their own stories as quickly as possible, either personal stories. Yeah, that's probably most relevant, but even maybe fictional, depending on the kids and
Right.
their abilities.
But also changing content. So I know what we've done in the past, another district and I went through some of the stories, and yes, like if you're going to be playing with your little sister and blocks her like the doll, so Hannah plays with her sister, that one isn't appropriate per se for that age. However, you could change the characters or you know, in some of the other stories and make it of interest, right, to the students. You can use their names and really engage them more so. But there's very few stories that wouldn't, that I feel would not be appropriate, because I think developmentally they are. All right.
Yeah, Abby has some more ideas too. But Elizabeth Blackwell is asking about the use of story champs with self-contained students who are new AAC users. Yeah. So AAC is a tricky one, right? Because, and actually I have a handout on simplifying story champs and it has some section on AAC. Are you able to drop that in there for her?
Yeah.
And there's kind of some prerequisite skills to be able to retell a story. Not that the story champs isn't useful, but I wouldn't be expecting a brand new AAC user to be retelling a story or generating their own stories right away. But you can use it for other things, like for labeling and, you know, maybe, you know, using some of their adjectives or whatever is on their board or their device. But you also might consider making sure that they have the prerequisite skills, which would be that they have a requesting repertoire and a receptive language repertoire. And there's a handout, the three skills.
I'm getting it. I'm getting it.
Like the three skills
on the website. Yes. Like I have it.
Okay. Yeah.
You got to find it on the research page, but it's right here.
Yeah. Attention to the story. Yeah. Yeah. You could still use pieces of it for like answering questions or receptive language or just simple expressive, maybe one symbol words. But AAC was one of the reasons why I went to South Africa for my Fulbright, because I worked at the Center for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. And while I was there, I did a systematic review of AAC interventions to develop like commenting, telling about, and labeling repertoires, which the majority of the AAC research is all on requesting, and you teach requesting differently than you do these other things. And Story Champs like assumes that you already know how to request, right? You're really working on these longer utterances, more complex language. But AAC users need that as well, as long as they have a requesting repertoire and a receptive language repertoire. You can use Story Champs to do those things. Yeah, that's the handout right there. The 3 skills needed before storytelling.
Okay, well, that's gonna wrap it up for tonight. We could stay on here all night. But thank you all for being here. And for our friends overseas, thanks for joining us in the morning. Really appreciate it. If you guys have any questions for Trina, go ahead and you can reach out to her, or if you get in touch with me, you're going to receive an email. I'll have my contact if you want me to forward it to Trina. I absolutely can. But other than that, thank you all so much. And I look forward to seeing you at next month's webinar about multi-tiered systems of language supports.
Cool.
All right. Thank you all.
Thanks, guys.